Good evening. I'm Anjanette Levy, and thanks for joining me here live on YouTube. You are watching Law and Crime, and we have breaking news. Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students, well, we are hearing that he has agreed to plead guilty to murdering those 4 University of Idaho students in exchange for the state of Idaho taking the death penalty off the table. This news started kind of circulating on social media earlier this afternoon. And then the Goncalves family, the family of Kaylee Goncalves, one of those victims, confirmed that this information is indeed true. And let me tell you, they are not happy about it, not one bit. I want to put the picture of those 4 victims up on the screen. This case, let me tell you, shocked the town of Moscow, and it shocked the nation when these 4 beautiful young people, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle, were stabbed to death in their house off campus in Moscow, Idaho, back on November 13th, 2022. The 4 of them had gone to a football game. It was the homecoming game, the big game that November 12th. Kaylee had come back from Coeur d'Alene. She had moved out of her family's home, and she wasn't even supposed to be there, but she came back to the house on King Road to show off her brand new Range Rover to her lifelong best friend, Maddie, who you see there, and ended up dying, losing her life in the same bed, sleeping in the same bed as her best friend. Bryan Kohberger, this is somewhat surprising because he had maintained his innocence for so very long, saying through his attorneys that he did not commit these murders, despite the fact that his DNA was found on the inner snap of a K-bar knife sheath that was found next to the leg of Madison Mogen. These beautiful young college kids stabbed to death in their house off campus. Maddie laying there in her bed, sleeping, minding her own business, a knife sheath found next to her after she was stabbed. And Bryan Kohberger said, I didn't do this, despite the fact that his Hyundai Elantra, the white Hyundai Elantra, matched the description of the car seen leaving the scene, and that DNA being on that knife sheath. I actually have one of those knife sheaths here, sitting here in my office, and we can get that and talk a little bit about that here very shortly. But first, I want to bring in Philip Dubé. Philip Dubé is a criminal defense attorney. He practiced in Los Angeles for many, many years. And Philip, thank you so much for joining me. You were court-appointed counsel. You worked as court-appointed counsel, for decades, right, in Los Angeles County. And you and I have been talking about this case for more than a year, it feels like, about what was going to happen, what could happen. I remember specifically after Judge Hippler ruled that the evidence in this case would not be suppressed, you and I specifically spoke about this possibility and about just the massive amount of evidence in this case that pointed toward Bryan Kohberger, and how you and I feel like I could pull up the clip right now, discussed how a plea agreement may be in Bryan Kohberger's best interest. So what are your thoughts about Bryan Kohberger? First of all, about the state of Idaho actually agreeing to take the death penalty off the table in exchange for Bryan Kohberger pleading guilty, because this is somewhat surprising to me, given the fact that, this is such a heinous crime, but at the same time, it's not surprising to me.
Not in the least. And frankly, I'm going to send Anne and Ashley a congratulations card. They both deserve to be 2025's all-star attorneys. They have accomplished 2 significant things. First of all, one of the hallmarks of any good attorney, and I tell this to clients all the time, I tell it to fellow attorneys all the time, is keep your client out of court. And what both sides have done right here is they've secured a victory, not just for the client, but on behalf of the public interest. What have they accomplished here? First of all, Bryan is not contesting these charges. He is conceding defeat. He is admitting guilt to 4 murders. He is agreeing to waive all appellate rights, but in exchange, he will be institutionalized in a 5x9 for the rest of his life. That means he has essentially spared all the witnesses, all the families, the victims next of kin, the aggravation, the trauma, and the heartache, not to mention the expense of having to go through a trial. And what if, hypothetically, the jury deadlocks and you have to retry the darn thing? You don't have to do any retrials, no appeals, no trials of original jurisdiction. It's all a done deal. And I think both sides did a fantastic job. As for Ann Taylor, I think initially, people gave her a bad rep, but she had an obligation to work up the guilt phase. And when, she was foreclosed from proceeding in the guilt phase with the defenses she thought she had, then column B is you go for mitigation. And in mitigation, the issue is not whether or not your client walks, but it's one of housing. Will your client be housed in maximum security for the rest of his life, or will he be condemned to death row awaiting execution by firing squad? All of that comes to arrest. And I realize that for some of the families, it might not be the result that they wanted, but hopefully in time, as the dust settles and they realize he is gone, he will become a fixture of the Idaho Department of Corrections for eternity. They can put it behind them as well.
Philip, one thing that's so interesting to me is the fact that we were talking just in the last week or so about the defense in this case wanting a continuance because the defense said, we're simply not ready. We need more time to go through the mountains of discovery in this case. We need more time to work up the mitigation. They just weren't ready. Also, we had that massive leak of evidence to Dateline that they're still allegedly investigating. There's a special prosecutor who the judge confirmed has been appointed in some of the court documents. I'm kind of wondering to myself, this had to have been in the works. There's no way. I don't know. Am I wrong? Am I wrong that this just came about in the last few days? Or do you think it did come about in the last few days? Or has this been something that maybe has been discussed between the parties leading up to the judge's ruling on the continuance?
I think a lot of it hinged on the desires of Bryan Kohberger. Remember, in the end, he's the client. He's the one with the final say as to whether or not he wants to exercise his right to the guilt phase and the penalty phase. If he's willing to waive it all, admit guilt, and take his life without parole, then so be it. That is when you take that offer to the prosecution and grovel, basically. And I've had to do it many times in my career where you have a dead bang loser. Your client is looking at a minimum at life without parole. If you really think about it, what does the prosecution have to lose? They have essentially prevailed. They are now proving 4 counts of special circumstance murder without having to give it to a jury, without having to retry it, without having to brief it on appeal. It's just complete finality. Off he goes to prison. The matter is closed for all time. And make no mistake about it, that if and when he takes this deal, and he on the record waives all appeals, and behind everybody's back, from behind prison walls, he files a notice of appeal or maybe a petition for writ of habeas corpus, guess what? He is back to Jump Street on all those charges. Everything will be reinstated. And if he thinks he's going to play games with the state of Idaho, he should bring it, because next time there won't be any more offers. He will get his trial, and chances are he will get the death penalty.
Just last week, I was breaking down, just last week I broke down how Ann Taylor wanted to push back this trial and how she said she wasn't ready. I mean, it's just amazing to me how this turn of events happened. So there was some reporting out there. Nobody knew at the time whether or not it was true. There was some reporting out there about maybe Bryan Kohberger's mother didn't want him to take a plea deal. We have no clue if that was true or not. Do you think maybe this is something he talked to his family about? Because he had to have signed off on this.
If he spoke to his family about it, it means that he was on a recorded call from behind prison walls. Those conversations are not privileged. So anything that he would have said to mom, dad, or any other relative or friend would be recorded, and it could come into evidence. And if he said something like, Mom, I think I want to take the deal. Mom, I want to plead guilty. Mom, don't be upset at me, but I really did do this. I need to resolve this. And then for whatever reason, the deal fell through. That call's coming into evidence. And that's a classic example of why you don't talk when you're on the phone about your case while in custody. But there's really no way to know whether or not he spoke to his parents. But my instincts tell me that the conversations were really between Bryan and the defense team, because ultimately they're the ones who guide him and navigate him through this sort of abyss, through this Byzantine sort of pathway to justice. And I'm telling you, I really believe that Ann Taylor earned her keep this time. She is sparing her client the death penalty.
Most certainly. And, you know, we talked so many times, Michael, about, or I'm sorry, Michael. Somebody named Michael just texted me. I apologize, Philip. I apologize.
I have a brother named Michael.
It popped up right on my laptop. I
No
apologize.
worries.
We talked about the evidence in this case so many times and tried to give Bryan Kohberger the benefit of the doubt. So, that is something I think we tried to do, but the evidence appeared to be just incredibly overwhelming. Even giving him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I'm going to go over the evidence one more time. You know, at least one of the most damaging or most damning pieces of evidence was his DNA found on this part of the K-bar knife sheath right here. This inner snap. That's where it was found.
Yeah.
And so,
and by the way, Ann Jeanette, you can bet they had it tested by their own independent lab and they couldn't refute it.
Yeah, so, most certainly. You know that they did. Yeah. And so, you know, that right there is such a damaging piece of evidence that, you know, that that something had to. It's such a damaging piece of evidence. I don't know how they were going to contest it. Their own experts said that it was his DNA. Nobody thought that it wasn't his DNA. They were going to have to either say the sheath was planted or that somebody else put it there. Plus, you had the car to contend with. You know, the vehicle description, the FBI saying this is more than likely, you know, this is the car we're looking for. And it was his car. You know, you had the black clothing, the balaclava, you have the Amazon searches for the K-bar knife and sheath. You had all of these different things. And it was just, it was too much. I think it would have been too much for them to overcome. And Ann Taylor in court at times has seemed incredibly defeated.
Exactly. And remember, all she was hoping for at this point was prevailing in the penalty phase. So if you really think about it, she did prevail without having to show a jury that the aggravators were outweighed by the mitigators, if you will. She doesn't have to prove it. The prosecution doesn't have to prove anything. The only thing that both sides are conceding is that he is not getting death. But if you really think about it, it is still a victory. He will never, ever be released or re-enter society again. He is off the streets for all time.
I want to talk to you now, Philip, about the families in this case. The most vocal of the families has been the Goncalves family, Kaylee Goncalves' family. Her parents, Steve Goncalves, and his wife, Christy Goncalves, they've been incredibly vocal. They wanted the death penalty in this case. And I want to share my screen and show you what they had to say about this. They confirmed that this news was indeed true. I want to make clear too to our viewers that the courts are not confirming any information about whether or not there's going to be a hearing. There's information out there that, you know, that he will be changing his plea on Wednesday. But the courts are not confirming that. They're saying they'll have more information tomorrow. So that tells you something's going on. If they're saying, oh no, they're not denying it. So we know something is happening. But this is the Goncalves family page. This is where they keep people up to speed and up to date. And as I mentioned, they've been incredibly vocal. They've wanted the death penalty for Bryan Kohberger. They wanted a trial. they've made it clear many times that they did not want a plea agreement, even if it meant avoiding a trial and having the death penalty taken off the table. And they posted on Facebook earlier tonight, "It's true. We are beyond furious at the state of Idaho. They have failed us. Please give us some time. This was very unexpected. We appreciate all of your love and support. Hashtag heartbroken. Hashtag Kaylee Jade forever." So they really are upset. How does a family deal with that, and how do prosecutors go ahead and go with a plea deal like this when at least one of the families is opposed to it?
Well, first of all, I look to law, right? Everything that prosecutors and defense attorneys do, and certainly judges, is circumscribed by state and federal law. The law does not say that victims and victims' families are a party to the prosecution. What they are is they are included in the conversations. They are sort of incorporated into discussions. They're kept apprised of all the proceedings, what is pending, what's going on, if something is calendared in court, if there is restitution that could be outstanding and owed, that type of stuff, so that they're not left in a lurch and left in the dark as to what's going on under that Marsy's Law, we call it. They have a Bill of Rights. However, they don't get to control the charges, and they don't get to control the outcomes, particularly in the state of Idaho. So what you do to comfort them is you include them in the conversations and you explain to them why they are settling. And if we're honest, if we're all really honest, it is possible that a jury could have deadlocked on penalty. Remember, there was quite a bit of litigation and workup done on Bryan that he is living on the autism spectrum. And there could be one juror out there just waiting to be impaneled who could actually find that to be a significant enough mitigating factor to spare his life. And if that were the case, do you really want to retry the penalty phase? So what you have here is finality, and you explain that to the family, and hopefully with time, they might not be able to digest that and embrace that sort of unceremoniously and overnight, but hopefully with time, they will accept it. And something else that I've seen, Anjanette, and prosecutors will weigh in on this as well, you'd be amazed how many people over time change their views about capital punishment, that at some point they kind of soften up. I don't know if it's because they have moments of faith where they look to the cosmos, they look to God or wherever, and they find some compassion or forgiveness for people, or they just believe that the government has no right or business in ending life, that the natural order of things is for people to die naturally and not at the hands of some type of what we call judicial homicide, namely from a jury. And hopefully with time, they will embrace these concepts because they will find peace with it. And they'll also know he is never getting out.
Philip, I want to bring in now to the conversation Sunny Slaughter. She has trained Homeland Security agents in the past. And Sunny, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I know you and I covered this back in the very beginning together. It's so wonderful to see you tonight. Tell me, if you would, your reaction, Sunny, to Bryan Kohberger apparently agreeing to plead guilty to 4 counts of murder in exchange for a life sentence and having the death penalty taken off the table. Oh, Sunny, I feel like we're not hearing you. We'll just have to fix that. There should be in your settings a way to adjust your audio.
Is she muted? Oh boy.
It's technology. It's great when it works. Sunny, down there it says settings, and down there it says settings. There's a gear, and then you should be able to go to your audio, and I think you should be able to fix your audio. You could always try to. Oh, I can hear you now. Okay,
Okay.
Sunny Slaughter is in the house. We can hear you now. So, Sunny, I was just wondering. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Sunny, what
Yeah.
is your reaction to Bryan Kohberger agreeing to plead guilty in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table in these heinous, heinous murders of these 4 beautiful college students?
First, let me thank you for having me on. You and I go, I literally was texting Alyssa. I said, oh my God, this is full circle. And being with you is absolutely full circle. And Philip, it's great to see you. I I am trying to take this all in. There was overwhelming evidence, as both of you stated. This was a lot, but the crimes also, they almost became personal for me because it was so heinous and so graphic, and my first appearance. But and let me say this, I was in I'm a Florida Department of Law Enforcement instructor, and last week I was teaching my executive leadership class, and the Kohberger case was one of the 3 cases that we discussed because this is such a critical case when it comes to law enforcement responding and interacting with the public and with families, and how a quiet investigation can happen. They were moving behind the scenes with the public, and the public was not aware, and the public really wanted answers, but I think it was to their benefit not to hold things close to the vest and to really conduct an investigation. One of the critical points that I made last week was the stop with Bryan and his father in the car, and the fact that during that stop, people, there was some complaints about, that it was a stop that should have happened, and I can't even get my words together. But the evidence for the murder that he threw away was actually in the car at that time. If you go back, he never left his parents' home as he was doing the throwaway of critical evidence that law enforcement found at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. That evidence was traveling with him down the highway. Um, so law enforcement has got to be really proud of themselves in the way in which they handled this investigation. They handled the case. I know people didn't like it, but I think it was necessary. But I also understand how the family feels, and the fact that they don't feel like they were included in the conversation. But as Philip so eloquently said, you get to be a part of the conversation, but you don't get to control the conversation and the narrative. There is a process in place. So I think it's going to be incumbent upon the prosecutor's office to get with the family, the victim services, and to really have a conversation and a deep dive as to why they were not included in the conversation. And people need to understand that this is the way some things work sometimes. The death penalty, removing it off the table, we knew, we believed that there was enough evidence, that the DNA had already come back, that they had been working in silence and they had a solid case. And clearly, they had the right person, because he has now taken the plea deal at the last hour. And I don't think he did it for the family. He absolutely did it for himself. But I think that is a part of the control and manipulation that he had all throughout. And like Philip said, his potential for not getting convicted and being able to escape, the family really has to take a deep dive on that, and so does the entire public.
I want to put back up on the screen just to reiterate how upset Kaylee Goncalves' family is. They wanted a trial, as I said. Let's take a look at that one more time. They posted on Facebook. It's true. We are beyond furious at the state of Idaho. They have failed us. Please give us some time. This was very unexpected. We appreciate all of your love and support. Hashtag heartbroken. Hashtag Kaylee Jade forever. I now want to go to a post from TMZ. This is very interesting. They're saying this is an exclusive, and I'm going to pull this up and share my screen on this. They're saying that Xana Kernodle's family also opposes a plea agreement, or at least part of her family does. The family of Xana Kernodle is livid over the plea deal offered to accused murderer Bryan Kohberger, and they told prosecutors they had better not go through with it.
Wow.
Kim Kernodle, Xana's aunt, who was so furious she was in tears, tells TMZ prosecutors floated the idea of a plea deal a few days ago, and the family made it clear, no way. When we spoke with Kim, she was on a conference call with prosecutors. She says prosecutors told her the defense approached prosecutors. The defense initiated this with a plea deal, and the prosecution went along to spare the families the pain of a trial. Kim says that's ridiculous because at least two of the families, hers and the Goncalves family, wanted Kohberger to face a jury. So that raises the question, was the Chapin family in favor of a plea agreement? Was Maddie Mogen's family maybe in favor of a plea agreement? Kim says prosecutors were especially concerned that the families would have to see the gruesome crime scene photos of their loved ones, but she says, we know the graphics. They were not trying to spare us. Kim also says when her family got a call from prosecutors a few days ago about a deal, they were vague. Prosecutors never mentioned taking the death penalty off the table. What's especially puzzling, Kim says prosecutors told her there was enough evidence to secure a guilty verdict. Mm-hmm. As we reported under the deal, Kohberger will plead guilty to 4 counts of murder, and in return, prosecutors will take the death penalty off the table. There's a hearing scheduled for Wednesday. Presumably, that's when prosecutors and Kohberger will ask the judge to approve the deal. Kim Kernodle is saying she wants this decision delayed. So I guess, Philip, I'll go to your, it seems like at least the Kernodle family and the Goncalves family were opposed. Philip, your response to that.
I want you to pretend that this is a civil case and not criminal. Let's just pretend that it's a wrongful death and that the family is suing. But Bryan Kohberger agrees to settle and is going to give them the max. If you analogize that to criminal, he has been sued by the state of Idaho for his liberty of a lifetime, and he is giving them the max. He is willing to settle. You don't have to prove it. It's all yours. You get your judgment. Not only do they get their 4 convictions, but he will never be released. If he ever tries to appeal, he's back to Jump Street on the charges, and he will then face a jury. Why would you want a trial when you've already prevailed without one? It's ridiculous if you really think about it. The only thing that they are being deprived of is the death penalty. That's the bottom line. Death or life without parole. And like I said earlier, that is not a decision for victims and victims' families to make. It is ultimately the decision of prosecutors and of course for the judge to accept that plea and to accept that disposition. And I don't think that any judge is going to reject a plea agreement merely because victims are dissatisfied with the penalty. He stands convicted and off he goes. So hopefully with time, they will be consoled by the fact that they really did prevail and that he is never, ever getting out.
Sonny, your thoughts?
I know they wanted to have a trial and they wanted the death penalty, but this is a death sentence for him. He is never going to leave where he is. He is going to die in prison. We don't know how soon or how long that will be, neither do they. And as somebody who has lost my brother-in-law when he was murdered, and it took almost 7 years to get his wife for the conspiracy. She is in one prison now. She will go to another prison. Well, she will stay there for life. She will not get out. So there is more comfort in knowing. And I think the family, they have to get over the shock of it all. And I know they think they know all of the things that happened in the house. But as a family member who has seen the very gruesome details of your loved one's murder, their bodies, and all of the things that you find out, it never leaves you. It never gives you the peace that you think it does because a person is on trial, because those images stay with you. I can still see them now. So I think the family has to take a deep breath. They have to take some time and really think about what it was, the outcome that is really needed. And that is for him to never, ever have the opportunity to do this to anyone again. We will never, we, the world, the community will never forget the beautiful, precious lives of all four of them, because their families will help us remember, and we will take this with us wherever we go. This is the case that has changed a lot of people, a lot of minds about the death penalty, and a lot of minds about when we send our children off to school. Mm-hmm. They did that. So they have, I think they just need the time.
I want to move on now to what you think, Philip, will happen at sentencing. If there's a change of plea hearing on Wednesday, do you think they'll do the sentencing at that point in time as well? Or because you don't really need a pre-sentencing investigation if you're pleading guilty and you're going away forever. So will they just do the whole thing on Wednesday and just wrap up this case once and for all?
I doubt it. I think they're going to take the plea and put it over for sentencing and victim impact statements. And that way you'll accomplish a couple of things. First of all, you'll let the dust settle between the time of the plea and the time of sentencing, and they can get their thoughts together as to how they want to address the court at sentencing and let them know what the effect of these murders have had on their personal lives. Something else the court can do, and I've actually done this myself during my career, and that is after a plea is taken in lieu of trial, we set it for a restitution hearing. And it's only heard by the court. It's done outside the presence of any jury. And the court takes evidence as to all the economic losses sustained by the victims and the victim's family. And what it does is it gives the families an opportunity to express themselves in court. They can kind of get it off their chest, what they've lost, what it's cost them. And sometimes it kind of eases the pain and takes the place of a full-on jury trial. And by doing it that way, they get their day in court, they're included, and they also get a judgment for civil restitution. And trust me when I tell you, they will tap into his prison earnings for the rest of his life. So the few times he might want to buy some special, hygiene products for himself, or some special comestibles from the commissary, like canned tuna fish or whatever they eat, in lieu of all that terrible high carbohydrate, high sodium, high fat food they give him, all that money is going to go to the family. And hopefully that will give the family some comfort that he's going to suffer by eating junky prison food for the rest of his life. And I know to you and me, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but trust me, when you're behind bars and the only thing you have to look forward to once in a while is a can of Star-Kissed tuna, it's a real treat. And it could provide some solace to the families, especially if they're given that chance to testify about it.
Sunny, what do you expect? I can only imagine when we do get to actual sentencing here, these victim impact statements will be so, I just can't even imagine. Just having watched some of these families over the last 2.5 years or so, almost 3 years. I think it will be very long. I think the sentencing hearing will be very long. It will be very emotional, but this will be their turn and their chance to really tell Bryan Kohberger. And who knows what impact it will have on him at all, if any. Given the fact that they've said he has level 1 autism, which used to be called Asperger's. He doesn't show emotion. He's said himself in his Tapatalk posts, I feel nothing, basically. He's empty. So we don't even know if he's capable of feeling emotion or feeling much of anything. But this will be gut-wrenching.
I've had to write 2 victim impact statements, unfortunately. And It was long. At the time, I didn't think it was cathartic because I was so angry. But later I realized, okay, I said everything that I could have said at the moment. And it is, like you said, an opportunity for them to say how they feel and what they want to say. But I will say the Asperger and him not responding will probably irritate them even more. But sometimes you need to say things out loud. And if they're going to be able to read it themselves, I couldn't read mine. I had to have the prosecutor read mine for me, minus the curse words, of course. I think it is necessary. They want, well, we only hear from 2 other families. And let me say that this was always going to be a problem in the first place, whether all 4 families would come together and make a mutual decision about how they felt about the death penalty or not. But I do think it's going to be important for them to say all of the things that they need to say out loud for all of us to hear them, what they have to say, their feelings, the emotions, the pain of it all. I did not know these 4 beautiful young people who had so much life, but I felt like I did from their families, from the photos. It's like we got to know them. So they are part of us. And I think it's important that the family has the time that they need. And they don't realize they are still grieving and they probably have years to go before they get to healing. But I think this is a part of the grief process for them, and being able to verbalize and articulate their feelings out loud, even their disdain for the courts and for the prosecution right now, in a very respectful way still, because this is a process. Hopefully it will give them some relief. And like Philip said, the restitution portion of it, if that is possible, make that happen, because we don't want Bryan to be able to make any money off of this later. We don't want there to be any books, any movies, not from him, anybody close to him that he could potentially benefit from. So we need to close all of that down. That needs to be a conversation that they understand, and that the family can even express that, and the courts particularly, take it under consideration. I can't believe that we're here right now.
I'm sorry.
I said, I can't believe that we are here right now. I'm ready for a trial.
It's a little stunning. I mean, Philip and I had talked about this before, that we thought this could happen. But we were getting really up close to the line here. We were inching closer to jury selection, and maybe the judges, denial of the request for the continuance was the final straw.
Yeah.
And maybe they had a really serious come to Jesus meeting with Bryan Kohberger. Yeah. And they said, we can't beat this. We can't beat this. All we can do is save your life. And maybe the message finally got through. They had repeatedly said he was difficult. It sounded like they had difficulty really getting through to him in some respects, or maybe he just thought he could wiggle his way out of this. Philip, I'm wondering, does Bryan Kohberger speak at sentencing? Does he offer an apology? And does he have to allocute? Do the prosecutors want him to allocute to maybe shut this down once and for all of the conspiracy stuff?
Well, we won't know until we get to court on this, what the precise terms of the plea agreement are, But my guess is yes, they want a complete record of him admitting in open court everything that he did. And if you can get that on the record, and then he tries to finagle some type of appeal or petition for habeas corpus, they will have that record later on to get him. But I truly believe that this is a done deal. And frankly, I think the greater task for Ann Taylor was to get the prosecution to agree. Remember, prosecutors come from a political office. The head of their office is an elected official, and they have to answer to the body politic of their jurisdiction and to voters, to the electorate, about their decisions. And it's one thing to have apprehended him and to file charges and to bring him to justice. But the last thing you want is for voters to think you threw in the towel. But you would be amazed, Anjanette, and Sonny backed me on this. There are a lot of people, I'm sure, even in Idaho, who are against the death penalty.
Yes.
Not everybody is on board with it. And the pendulum is gradually swinging away from it with time. And I do predict eventually all states are going to abrogate it. And hypothetically, what if these homicides would have occurred, for example, in Minnesota, where they have no death penalty?
Mm-hmm.
Then what? Okay,
Yeah.
he needs to plead guilty. Off he goes to prison for the rest of his life. You're in the same posture. He's never getting out. If that type of criminal justice is not enough for victims, well, then I don't know what else is left. Short of vigilante justice or changing the law of your state, that's the max. And that's what you get under the law. And I'm heartened that prosecutors really gave in and really took a hard look at the mitigation and said, we're going to go ahead and accept this plea deal, and we're going to go through with it and end this once and for all. And in the end, if we're all honest, it's going to spare all these families the heartache, the aggravation, and the expense of having to come to court and face him and wonder what on earth a jury might do.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. With death penalty cases, you never know, and it only takes one juror.
Exactly.
And so they may have gone through the time and the expense of a trial, and with the Dateline leak, that's the least of it. But the Dateline leak didn't help matters, certainly in the last month or two. Plus, you have the autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. Mm-hmm. Anything else that potentially could have been mitigating. You may have gone through the expense and the horrific nature of a trial and gotten the same result.
Exactly. And let's just pretend.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say really quickly, nobody ever thinks about this, and I think we should. There would have to be a jury that would have to see all of this evidence, all of the photos, take all of that in. And just from what we know, and we haven't seen all of the details that the jury would see, this has impacted us. It has definitely impacted me. So this will also spare additional harm, the collateral damage of a jury pool that would then become so impaled and ingrained with this trauma from this case and everything that they see during this case that they would never be able to unsee again. Mm-hmm. And there are no services for jury members after this. After all of this trauma, juries don't, they don't get to go to therapy for 3 or 4 years to get over all of this.
Yeah.
Philip, why does Bryan Kohberger suddenly have a change of heart and say, okay, I'll take the deal? Does he finally realize, looking at all of the evidence, does it finally just sink in that I'm toast? I'm more than likely toast, and I'll be lucky if I don't get sent to a potential firing squad. Does it finally sink in, or does he think maybe, maybe like my life just really wasn't, I'm tired of fighting. Maybe my life wasn't really that great outside of prison or jail or whatever. I wasn't having that great of a time of it. He's got the hair, I forgot with the mitigating stuff. He's a recovering opioid addict. I mean, kudos to him for overcoming that. But there, you had that as well. I'm not saying that in any way justifies anything, but I'm just saying that the guy's got some major issues. He's had some major issues in his life. So why does he change his mind all of a sudden?
Well, remember, he wasn't a humanities or fine arts major. He was studying criminology and getting his doctorate. So he knew the drill. He knew good and well what evidence would be needed to convict him and to execute him. And he could see on paper what they had. He could hear his lawyer going over it with him line by line, showing him all the photos, showing him all the digital data. And if that's not good enough for him, then you know what? You shut down all settlement talks. But I think ultimately, over time, he really saw the gravity of all that evidence. And he said to himself, you know what is the point? My only hope here is to save my life. And that's what his lawyer did. His lawyer saved his life. And one other point, if you really think about it, let's just pretend, and I'm not pointing the finger at the prosecution or the cops in this case, that one or both leaked this stuff to the media.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just go with that. It would trigger remedies for the defense. And one of them could be to get death off the table anyway. So isn't it fair to maybe infer that this is a winky wink, that maybe we did have a hand in the leak and we're taking our lumps now? Just take death off the table. He's conceding guilt. He's convicted of 4 counts of murder. We don't have to prove it. We don't lose face. And certainly we don't bring any shame or obloquy to our office in the face of bad politics, if you will, and move on. And it's a win-win for both sides, because if we're honest, this was the best that Ann could hope for. And by the way, you know what I thought was a really bad piece of evidence? People keep forgetting about this. Is, correct me if I'm wrong, Anjanette, he had a replacement sheet sent to mom and dad in Pennsylvania, didn't he?
He didn't. He
No.
didn't have it sent, but he apparently looked. His click activity, his Amazon click activity showed that he had gone on Amazon and looked again and possibly put it in the cart, but then didn't complete the purchase.
Yeah.
And they tried to say, his defense tried to say that doesn't mean anything. We have an expert who's going to say things can influence that, et cetera, et cetera. So,
well, good luck with that. Look, the bottom line is they should be kicking their heels that they got a life sentence in this case. This is a done deal. I only hope that the judge actually accepts the plea, because in the end, the judge is the final arbiter of justice. Yeah. And if the judge really wants to, he can reject the plea and say, no, you filed this as a special circumstance case. I'm not going to allow you to withdraw it. We're going to let a jury decide, or if he wants to waive jury, he can let this court decide. I'm hopeful that Judge Hippler won't do that and will just accept this plea and close it out. There's an old expression in government law, and that is, a closed file is a happy file. Everybody's got a file. The court has a file. The defense has a file. The prosecution has a file. Everybody wants to close this puppy out, and everybody wins. The judge has one less case on the docket. The defense has spared their client's life, and the prosecution doesn't have to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a done deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really, I'm still a little bit surprised. I am and I'm not. I go back and forth. I was actually thinking about this the other day. I was kind of wondering, I wonder if there's something going on. I wonder if there have been any behind the scenes convos, because this isn't the first case I've covered, the first death penalty case that I've covered, where you go up pretty close to trial and then it seems like it's always the defense who initiates the discussion. So something happened, in my opinion, Sonny, something happened that prompted the defense to go to, because the client had to be willing to do it. So something, in my opinion, prompted the defense to go to the prosecution, to the state, and say, "Hey,
I agree.
We make a deal." So, what was it that happened? What was the impetus?
I think the impetus was they had no more delays. The defense's objective is always to delay. And when there was no more delay, I think he couldn't deny where he was. And it was getting so close. And everything that he wanted to do, or that the defense wanted to do, as a criminology student, he knows process. He understands it. And he looked right into it and said, you know what? If I go to trial, I know they have the evidence, but more importantly, I also know that I'm guilty and I don't have anything else. I know I can't take the stand. So I think he made a conscious decision to save himself Asperger aside, he's very smart.
Oh, yeah.
He has overcome a lot of things, and he realizes that this was his last best hope. And this is really about him. This is not about sparing the family. This is not about anything else. He wanted them, and they did. His team throw everything at the wall, and let's see what sticks.
I've got so many, just so you two are aware, my text messages have been blowing up for the last hour. Like, can you believe this? What's going on? I won't say some of the words that are in these text messages, but people are very surprised, needless to say, because they never thought that Bryan Kohberger would actually plead guilty.
Yeah,
so it makes you wonder if these are conversations that his lawyers have had with him many times, that we can't beat this.
Oh yeah.
I think so. I mean, it's shocking. I was ready for the trial, but when I saw this, I was like, is that right?
Yeah.
It's a huge victory for the defense. Assuming the judge goes along with it, this is a tremendous win. You have a 4-count murder of college kids in their salad years, whole lives ahead of them, where the world is their oyster, wiped out at the hands of a psychopathic ASD type, criminology student, or ADS rather, gone, wiped out. Yes, he is convicted. His life is over. But under Idaho law, he could have very easily gotten the death penalty. And it is now being taken off the table in exchange for the plea. I'm telling you, this is such a commendable moment for the defense. I'm truly, truly happy in this outcome. I am. Now, on the other hand, it would have been a great trial to watch. From a true crime standpoint, right, Anjanette? Right, Sonny? This would have been a really delicious trial to air, talk about, banter, get into all the legal issues, get into the weeds, but in the end, Bryan is not our client. He is a client of Ann Taylor and that defense team, and they owe him a duty of loyalty, not to the true crime viewing audience. As entertaining and as salacious as it would have been, they did their job in pursuit of justice for their client.
How much do you think that Judge Hippler played a role, in this coming together?
The short answer is it depends. It depends if the prosecution had a hand in that leak and they were afraid that the judge was going to dismiss the death allegation, or, if the defense was handcuffed by not having enough time to work up the mitigation. Because if you think about it, it really inured to their benefit, even being without the time to have all their experts look at everything that they needed to have analyzed. It doesn't really matter, because this is what they wanted anyway. They wanted a life verdict, and this is what they're getting. They're getting mercy. So in the end, for the defense, it's a win-win. I don't think Ann Taylor and her crew ever believed for 1 minute that Bryan was going to walk on his precious alibi defense, that he was stargazing or, contemplating his navel while playing a sitar at Ashram, that kind of thing. There was no way he was going to walk away from it. It was really an issue of housing. Does he go to general pop? Does he go to maximum security, or is he condemned to death row?
Sonny?
Today there was discussion about the people that did not want to come, that didn't want to testify in this case. And, they didn't want to be associated.
Pennsylvania witnesses. For those of our viewers who aren't aware, sorry to interrupt you, but there were some witnesses from Pennsylvania who were being subpoenaed by the defense. Some, we believe, for the state too. And they had to show up at court and say why they didn't want to go, why they were contesting the subpoena. So that happened today. But go ahead, Sonny. I just wanted to clarify for our viewers.
And thank you for the context, because I'm talking like everybody, of course, knows all of the details, and that's important. But you know, the collateral damage from these trials, as I was saying before, with the jury and with the witnesses, and as we have seen that there has been a lot of controversy and a lot of disruption around social media and the media and the engagement with these trials. You know, speaking of, you know, previous trial that just got over, and how people really react to these things, I think this case would have been exactly like that in some aspects. You know, witnesses being targeted, and witnesses, you know, feeling, you know, harassed, and media folks feeling. There has been a lot. I think this could have happened in this particular case. That picture that you just put up of him is so horrific and scary. So I think this kind of gives, if this goes through, and if the judge allows this goes through, I think it really kind of tampers down on some of what we have been seeing with the public and the media when it comes to some of these cases, because this is a very a hot button case. And, you know, the tearing down of the home. And remember, we're talking about the victims' families, but there's an entire community in that area that was deeply impacted by this. The educational institution, the home being teared down, the neighbors. So many people were impacted. So many people are we had the direct victims and then the indirect victims. And I think allowing this win, because it really is a win, like Philip keeps saying, it really is. The families don't see it that way right now. And I understand that. And I respect their perspective and I respect their feelings. And they need to have all of those. But generally speaking, I don't know if this case playing out in the public I think we should remember the 4 young, beautiful lives in a way that gives them elevation and not degradation in how they died.
And yeah, I agree. And I think that they need to be the focus. And now that he's admitting to this once and for all, the focus needs to turn to them again. That's who the focus needs to be on.
Yeah.
As I say that, though, I am going to say I think we need some answers about this.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd like some answers about this. I would like answers. I would like answers about this. You know, this was going to be very tough for them at trial, dressing up as DM, the much maligned roommate by people who support Bryan Kohberger and the defense. They took so many shots at DM, who provided the description of Bryan Kohberger and wearing all black. I mean, it's like, are you reliving what you did? Yeah. Dressing in all black, sans balaclava, sans mask, and taking selfies. I don't know, but I would like some answers about these things. And not that it's going to change anything, but my God, yeah, this is one of the worst crimes I've ever covered. I've covered, you know, sadly, I've covered so many horrific crimes, but this is a crime where someone targeted strangers. And I've voiced my theory about what this is and why what I believe, who the target was before. I believe Maddie was the intended target. I think this whole thing, something happened up there. You know, Kaylee was there unexpectedly. This is my personal opinion about it. And things from the killer's perspective spiraled out of control. But I think that the families deserve some answers.
Right. Yeah.
And I hope they can get them.
I do too. I really do too. I think it's, I want answers, because I think law enforcement needs to know things. We all do. I just think how we get those answers is going to be interesting.
Well, I think the plea answers all the questions. Basically, what that plea is acknowledging is the commission of the crime. I mean, that's ultimately what it is. It is tantamount to a confession. Really honest. He will be adjudicated guilty as to each count of murder. And, you know, what else do you need to know? It's already well established that they were all killed by knife. It was already well established that the knife sheath was recovered under one of the victim's bodies. His DNA is on it. I mean, if you really think about it, this is a very sort of multi-chromatic stitchery, sort of a portrait of what went down in that house on that night. And one other thing, people don't get it. This was solved quickly and is getting resolved quickly.
Mhm.
Most capital cases can take years, let alone to solve and to make an apprehension, but to get to trial. But these homicides occurred, correct me if I'm wrong, November of 22. He was apprehended early 2023. He's pleading out, July of 2025. I mean, that is some pretty swift American justice, if you really think about it. And maybe the families just need a little more time to marinate in what is happening. And hopefully with time, as they start to grasp really the gravity of what Bryan Kohberger spared them in the end, that they might find some cathartic release for all of this and move on with their lives. They won't ever get over it. No, they'll get through it, hopefully, as they say, And I wish that for them. I've never met these families. I don't know who they are, but I wish that for any family. But I promise you, Anjanette, and I promise you, Sonny, most capital cases, once they're apprehended, take a good 5 years to work up, at least.
And I don't, not to interrupt you, Philip. I'm looking down at my phone. I don't want you to think I'm ignoring you or anything. I'm just looking to see if any of the other families have put any comment out or anything like that. Specifically the Chapins or Maddie Mogen's family. Her mother is not particularly active on social media. But I'm looking here to see if there's anything else kind of floating around out there. I don't know if I see the families ever feeling anything but anger toward Bryan Kohberger or disgust. But yeah, I'm just looking around here for everybody who might be watching to see if there's any.
I was trying to check too to see if anything had come through.
And by the way, that selfie creeped me out. To this day, I get flashbacks from it. I really do. Not the one where he's in a black sort of hoodie thing, but where he's actually taking that selfie for mom, where he looks like he just had a blood transfusion. He's, putting the thumb up like he's saying mission accomplished, or it's all in a day's work, or yeah, I got this. That one really creeped me out, Now, to be fair, I don't know how it's relevant. And I'm not even sure that it should come into evidence. Someone just sending a selfie to mom, I don't know that it proves anything, other than he's alive and well at the time the photo was taken. But it sent a message to all the true crime folks out there that this guy is freaky creepy.
Yeah, it's, I in fairness, I tried to always say we need more context. Is this somebody who takes a lot of selfies? We don't know if he sent that to somebody, but yes, it's a little strange, a little odd, very creepy. That type of thing.
The fact that he is willing to say that he murdered them because he did is just like he is saying, I actually did this. You all were right the entire time, and I think that is horrific, and because him going to prison for the rest of his life, if he didn't, and if by chance he got off on this, he is a predator. And I think you were right who he was targeting. He is a predator. He is a serial killer, in that he did this so swiftly and almost so cleanly. What about if the sheath were not there?
Oh, he would have pulled it off. Absolutely. He would have pulled that off. Not enough to deny him.
Yeah. How and the genealogy and the DNA. What about? So when you think about the what ifs and the fact that he was caught, the family has to grab hold of what we have right now. And that is the fact that he made a mistake so critical that they know who murdered their child, because
By
they
the way,
can go a lifetime without knowing.
one other thing that his waiver of all his appellate rights necessarily includes is, remember, they brought a Fourth Amendment challenge to the
Mm-hmm.
collection of that genealogy data through the DNA sort
Yep.
of, what do they call it, investigative genealogy database. That is now waived. You don't get to raise that now. We
Yeah.
will never know from a higher court whether or not what the cops did without a warrant was constitutional.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Personally, I think it was. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a whole other conversation, but it will not be litigated. This will not be the test case for genetic genealogy within the meaning of the Fourth Amendment.
But Philip, haven't they all? I mean, it could have been because the FBI, violated terms of services, which was not, Hitler said that was not
No.
a Fourth Amendment violation. So
Correct.
no big whoop. That's a civil
Yeah.
issue. You and I have talked about that many times. But maybe there would have been some there, possibly at a higher court, probably not. But other courts have already ruled. And this was a different case because it's a hot case, not a cold case, where they used it.
Yeah.
But, the other courts have already ruled this can be done. So
Yeah.
now, guess what? In future cases, it's already been it's passed the smell test, at least here. So in this case, like, okay, he pleaded out. So maybe it's going to be used in hot cases again.
Well, the general rule is, and not to sound doctrinaire or professorial, is that you don't have the right to suppress evidence of identification. And really, if we were honest, all the DNA probe did was identify a suspect. And that is not grounds for suppression. I mean, that goes all the way back to the 60s from the Katz versus United States. You don't have an expectation of privacy in your identity. So I cannot envision the US Supreme Court reversing a decades-long precedent of no privacy interest in your identity to satisfy Bryan Kohberger in a 4-count murder. I think it would have been affirmed. They would have found no Fourth Amendment violation. And as we say, the fruit would not have been tainted by the search through that database. Now, whether or not there are civil causes of action for breaching terms and conditions of the contracts that people who have uploaded their DNA into those databases might have with the providers, that's another question. But criminally, everything was above constitutional board.
And I talked about this in my training last week with law enforcement, because I think it's important that when we talk about the law enforcement, that they understand more parameters of the law, because as their actions impact the way laws come about. Whether if they do something wrong, then it has impact. If they do something right, it could have impact, and it can be long term. So, and not just enforcement. I was talking to the leaders about how everything in an investigation matters, because it can have long-term ramifications. And something as simple as Miranda, okay? When you think about everything, it's not just a matter of what they do that shows up just because it's a matter of practice, but because it has a potential to actually impact laws, and not just in the state that they're in, which we were in Florida, but it has the potential to impact laws across the United States. So that is why every investigation must be clear, clean, and as cut and dry, and based in foundation, not just in practice, but in law. And for them, for law enforcement, to have an understanding of how every action has an impact. So I think this case is going to be precedent setting either way, and having the details, even if we don't have the trial in the same way with every piece of evidence, but going through the allocution and understanding that, then people like me and training law enforcement and lawyers and everything that we do, and you on the air, then it gives us a foundation for educating the public around policy, practice, and how these standards change everything that happens, and how the public must have a better understanding of criminal justice systems, so we can ensure that we have juries that are more knowledgeable about how they show up in court for these cases, and that the public will understand sometimes when it doesn't go the way people want it to go.
Well, in this case, at a minimum, it'll put to rest what the cops did in securing
Yeah.
that DNA evidence. It's a done deal.
At least on this, not necessarily on the leakage of the.
Oh, yes.
investigation.
Oh, that remains to be seen. To be honest with you, in light of this plea, I'm hopeful that the judge takes it off calendar and that they relieve the special prosecutor of their duties and just close the books on this and be done with it.
Mm.
You know why? Remember, I think, Anjanette, you and I talked about it on a previous episode, is let's assume the worst. And I'm not pointing the finger at the cops or the DA, but let's just pretend that one or both really did leak this. It's only a misdemeanor. You want to appoint a special prosecutor in the state of Idaho to get to the bottom of a misdemeanor? Really? When you have a plea now in a 4-count murder where a guy's going to go away and do LWOP? Sometimes you got to cut your losses and move on and close that file and make it a happy file.
Yeah, it's just, I see what you're saying, Philip, but it's still the principle of the matter that this was a huge case. This is the biggest murder case in this country. And it's not to dismiss, or, it would have been the biggest murder trial, the most highly publicized in some time. And for somebody to just do that.
I agree. I do. I agree.
That
it's unethical. It's a breach of confidence of the public. It is outside of the bounds of public service and their duties. And
well, worse yet, it was a violation of a court order. Remember, everybody was gagged. It was a protective order.
It runs the risk of violating also Bryan Kohberger's rights to a fair trial.
Exactly.
In a case where the venue had already been changed
and
where they'd already moved to the most populous county in the state of Idaho, and the county still isn't even, as far as counties go, in this country, it still wasn't. It wasn't like that big. You know what I mean? Like this was the last stop in Idaho.
Yes. Yeah.
We cannot circumvent the Constitution just because we think we can.
Yeah.
At least we should not.
Just to let you know, a prosecutor who I talk to quite often just texted me, you guys, wow. Wow. Just stunned.
Yeah.
Absolutely stunned.
Yeah.
I'm itching to know which prosecutor. Are you allowed to share, or you can't?
I don't feel I should.
Right? Okay, no problem.
But maybe off the air.
But can I tell you, I know plenty of prosecutors who would have given this same deal on these facts. Seriously, not every prosecutor feels that just because a case is a death case, that the defendant should in fact get death, especially if he doesn't or she doesn't want a trial. If they don't want to fight it, they're willing to throw in the towel, concede defeat, give them their LWOP, be done with it. Do you have any idea how many millions this plea is going to save Idaho? Do you have any idea? Now, I realize it might seem a little unpalatable to many viewers and to many people to sort of denominate these types of decisions to dollars and cents, but don't kid yourself. Most of our laws and most of our decisions are rooted in judicial economy, meaning fiscal considerations. All of the appeals are over. And most of the expenses tied to capital type appeals and litigation is just that. It's for the litigation. It's not the cost of housing the guy in prison. It's not the cost of getting the lethal injection or the electric chair or the firing squad ready to go. That's probably the cheapest part. It's having to pay all these attorneys for all these appeals, all the court time to brief this. It's millions and millions of dollars on top of all the housing and the medical and the feeding of the inmate.
And that's the thing. It's the appeals. The appeals take forever. And in many cases, I would say in most cases, Philip, maybe a lot of times they go all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, they try to get there. I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court, they take so few cases. But how many times have we covered cases where, the clock is ticking and where somebody's trying, last minute stay. And they try to go all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court rarely, if ever, takes those cases. Yeah. But that's what costs all the money. Now they can wrap that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Bryan Kohberger's family, because I know a lot of people they don't want to hear about them. But
they're victims too.
Of course.
They are victims.
We don't know them. They've been quiet through this whole thing.
Oh,
But their son and brother, apparently the defense said they were supportive of him.
Yeah.
He is now going away forever.
Yeah.
And if they hadn't already they have now come to the realization that he carried out this slaughter, and they are living with this now for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
Pardon my bathos or jumping the shark here. But if it would have been me and me calling my parents, I would have gotten a recording saying the number you have reached is no longer in service. They would have never come to my rescue. He is lucky to have such loving parents who cared about him and stayed silent and just waited this out. He's very fortunate. It sounds like he's blessed with a loving family.
Sonny?
You know, we can't. I have 4 children. I cannot predict what all 4 of them will do. I have one that I absolutely could not predict what he would do. But he is still my son. Bryan is still their son. And we have to respect that families may not agree. I'm sure they did not agree with this. I'm sure they are devastated. They probably have a lot of internal guilt in thinking about all of the things that they did or didn't do. But they have a right, an absolute right, to support their child in the way that they feel is necessary. But they are going to carry this burden with them like he is going away. He doesn't have to deal with other people. They are out here. They have to live with that. I think he has a sister. It is a lot. I think, he has a sister, I believe.
He has 2 sisters, actually, 2 older sisters. He's the youngest of 3. And I believe both of them, or at least one of them, I don't want to misspeak, one of them works in some type of social work field.
Oh, wow.
Back east? Is it back east? Do we know?
Yes, in Pennsylvania.
See, that's the other hardship. You know, it's one thing having a supportive family and you're locked up for the rest of your life, but you can't even really have bi-coastal visitation. It's just impracticable. How are you going to work that out? The reality of it is they may never see him again. And if they do, it might be once every 5 years. It's not as if you can catch a Greyhound or an Amtrak and keep going from Pennsylvania to Boise to see your son who's locked up. They really may never see him again. And by the way, his parents are not kids anymore. They're getting up in years. They're getting on in the years, and God only knows how much longer they have, you know?
Sonny?
I just, you know, when you sit in courtrooms like both of you have, and you see defense and you see prosecution and you see 2 families, we don't realize how devastating it is for everyone. It's that collateral damage that I was talking about. It is the pain of it all, the shame of it all, and how they move forward with what they now know to be true. We don't know. It is unlikely that he told them in advance over the phone or something like that. So,
oh, really? You don't think he told them?
I don't. Well, he could have passed a note to from his attorney, but I think had he said something over the phone, don't you think we might have heard something about that? Or maybe we will. Maybe he will have said, "I'm going to take this plea," and then they asked, "Well, are you guilty?"
Well, first of all, I sincerely doubt that he had that conversation over a jail call. I really do. His lawyers, I'm sure, have sat him down from day one and said, don't talk about your case to anybody, nobody. And I'm sure he's learned that lesson. He knows that all eyes are on him and all listening devices are plugged in.
And I wonder too, guys, if he said to his lawyers, can you call my mom and dad?
Yeah.
That's
true to them. So I don't have to do this.
Yeah.
You know, Antoinette, I was just thinking of something. You have covered this case from the very beginning, and I know how important it has been. I think you said earlier you wanted some answers. I think it would be good for you to ask to get those answers directly from him.
I think you're right. And on that note, Sunny Slaughter, I think we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Sunny Slaughter, thank you so much for joining me. It's been wonderful being with you. I feel like we've come full circle together on this. And so we should probably meet up again tomorrow morning if you are available. I'll hit you up offline.
Yes.
Philip Dubé, thank you so much for spending time with me tonight. We've been on this journey together too, covering this for quite some time. And thank you to all of our viewers too. We will keep you posted on this breaking story, and we'll of course bring you any new developments. And we're going to be, as soon as I get off here, we're going to be working on some stuff too, and doing all kinds of things to keep you up to speed on this. So hang tight. We are signing off. Everybody have a great evening. We'll be posting some other clips, so stay tuned to the Law and Crime YouTube channel.